In this video, we'll continue with populating the country-state drop-down list. Alrighty, so the back-end work for the REST API is done. Now let's handle the front-end development. So the user is going to select a country. Depending on the country selected, we'll populate the list of states. So here's our shipping address. The user selects a country, and then we'll populate the states for that selected country. Okay, so here's our development process, and this is all for the front end. The first thing we'll do is we'll create TypeScript classes for country and state. We'll add methods to the form service for countries and states. We'll update the checkout component to retrieve the countries from the service. We'll also update the HTML template to populate drop-down lists for countries. And then we'll add an event handler for the checkout component. So we'll read the selected country, and then we'll retrieve the list of states based on the selected country. And then finally, we'll update our HTML template to populate the drop-down list for states. And also here, just as a refresher, we have our back-end REST APIs already created. We can access various endpoints and it'll give us a list of all countries. And also we can find by country code and it'll give us a list of all states for that given country. And that's already up and running. So getting started here with step 1 of creating the TypeScript classes for country and state. And we'll have this class country. It'll have properties for ID, code, and name. And this will map over to the JSON data that we receive from the REST API. And then we'll do a similar thing here for state. We'll have a state class for ID and name. And again, mapping over to the JSON from the REST API. Alrighty, so moving ahead to step 2 of adding methods to the form service for countries and states. So we'll make some updates here to our Love to Shop form service. So we'll set up the URLs for countries and states. And our constructor will inject the HTTP client. And then we'll write the code here for get countries. So it returns an observable array of countries. And we simply make the call to HTTP client.get, get response countries. Remember, this is going to return an observable. We're going to map this JSON data from Spring Data REST over to our country array. And at the bottom, we'll create this interface, get response countries. And we use this to unwrap the JSON from Spring Data REST for that underscore embedded entry. And then here's the JSON here at the top. And notice here how we map the underscore embedded so we can actually get that list of countries or get that array of countries and then assign it and then send it back to the calling program. And this is a common technique. We've used this before in some of our previous videos. Alrighty, and we kind of just repeat the process for states. So we'll have this method here, get states, pass in the country code, and then we'll set up this search states URL. So we basically say find by country code and code equals the country code that they pass in. And then we do a similar thing. So this returns an observable. We map the JSON data from the Spring Data REST to a state array. And then at the bottom, we make use of this interface, get response states. Again, unwrapping the JSON from Spring Data REST, and we map it to that underscore embedded entry. So same coding that we've done before. Alrighty, now in step 3, we're going to update the checkout component to retrieve countries from the service. So in my checkout component class, I'll set up an array of country objects. And then here inside of this ng on init, we do all of our normal initialization work. Here we actually want to go out and populate the countries or get a list of countries from that form service. So I use Love to Shop form service.get countries. I do a subscribe. The data is returned. I simply do a console.log on those retrieve countries. And then also here I say this.countries equals data. So when the form is initially displayed, we're going to populate the countries. Now in step 4, we actually update the HTML template to populate the drop-down list for the countries. So in our HTML here, we have option ng4, let country of countries. And then we simply loop over that and we say country.name. So countries is that actual array that we defined in our actual component on the previous slide. And next we update our checkout component. We add an event handler. So for change event, we're going to call the method get states. So when they select a country, then we want to get the states for that given country. And so we'll accomplish this inside of this get states method. So a couple of things here. One is that I'll define two arrays of state objects for shipping and billing. We want to keep those separate because when the user chooses their different countries, we simply want to update the appropriate states for that given section for shipping address or billing address. And then inside of this method getStates, they'll pass in the form group. So I need to figure out which form I'm using, if I'm using billing or shipping. But basically I read the selected country code from the form and I retrieve the states for the selected country code. So here I say if form group name equals shipping address, then I assign this.shipping address states equals data, else this.billing address states equals data. And then at the bottom here, I select the first item by default. So I say form group.getState, set value data sub 0. So selecting the first state in that list of states that I retrieve. And then finally here, I want to update the HTML template to populate the drop-down list for states. So again, a similar thing. We simply loop over that array of our shipping address states, and then we simply give state.name. And that's the basic coding there for getting this set up. So let's go ahead and move into the video, dive into our IDE, and let's start writing some code.